Tell us about, in your own words, some of the challenges that you had. Seriously, because a friend of mine could hear up until the time he was 6 years old. Ed Turner,
Yes.
he's a local son of a banker, and so he was fortunate that he had his father had the wherewithal financially to send him to school early on. So at 6 years of age, he had a pretty good handle on the English language.
Right.
But your parents were both deaf.
They're both deaf after birth. Yeah, so it's not genetics, but yeah, both of them. My mom was 2 years old and she had German measles and pneumonia, so pretty much burnt out her inner ears.
And your father?
Same
Thing.
Yeah.
And so, what was the first challenge? If you could go back there 25 years, 28 years.
Thank you. 42 years.
42.
Years.
So
Yeah.
what's the first recollection that you had that I've got a real communication problem here?
And pretty much I talk about it in my show. But yeah, for me, sign language was my first language at 8 months old. And they do research nowadays showing that babies do babble in sign language. So at 8 months old, I was doing a sign for milk and mom. And so for me, the challenge was learning English because it is my second language. So I actually had to go and take speech therapy from kindergarten over to third grade. And a lot of times, like right now, doing this interview, talking, it's uncomfortable for me. I rather sign.
Really?
Yeah, I think in sign language. I express myself in sign language, and that's the reason why I do my show in sign language, because I want my mom and dad to have first access to it, and then I feel like I'm able to express myself that much more.
So, what are some of the challenges with other humans?
It's interesting growing up. People ask me, what was it like having deaf parents? And for me, I'm biased. I don't know what it was like to have hearing parents. Right. But they ask us silly questions like, "Oh, your mom and dad are deaf. How do they drive a car? Your mom and dad are deaf. How do they eat? Your mom and dad are deaf. How do they kiss?" Really? Yeah, those are the questions. Those are the questions I would get growing up. And of course, as you'll see in the show tonight, I give them answers that cause a lot of chaos and. Pretty much, and that's what my show is about. It's cultural. It's understanding cultural differences through comedy.
And how did you evolve into a comedian? And when did you decide that this is what I want to do? There obviously is some passion, some driven innermost from your heart. Right. Some I want to help other people. Is that has to be what drives you? That's just from the outside. Is that?
Yeah, both my parents were they're comedians themselves. We had a lot of, every Saturday night my mom would have all her friends come over. They would do jokes and stories in sign language. So I grew up seeing that. That was my television program because we really didn't watch TV growing up because there was no closed captions. So it's something, we didn't do. We didn't listen to TV. We didn't listen to records. So learning from my parents, I knew I wanted to become an interpreter because I saw how frustrated they were with back in the 70s, there was another kind of sign language being invented at the time. And they were saying, no, we want to keep American Sign Language. So I knew I wanted to become an interpreter. And then as an interpreter, I noticed I went towards the mental health performing arts side where there's legal, there's medical, there's car repair, there's all these different fields that you can do. And I found myself drawn to the comedy side and the mental health side because there's a lot of emotions in there. As comedians, we're all very emotional. And from that, as an interpreter doing comedy, I joined an improv group, a deaf improv group. And
where was this now?
Northern California.
Okay.
In the Sacramento, Northern California. It was about 10 years ago. I had some deaf friends say, why don't you come up on stage? Let's just make up some games. Whose line is it anyway was popular on TV. So we did it. And one night, somebody raised their hand and said, I challenge you to do a 10-minute story about your life. And I came up with the vacuum story, talking about how my mom was vacuuming the house. I went over, unplugged it. 10 minutes later, she realized the carpet was still dirty.
You're bad.
I was
bad to the bone.
I was a bad kid, yes.
And so you actually unplugged this vacuum, and she continued.
Yes, I think she knew. I think because I actually started crying. I felt so bad. I was like, it was my own guilt going, oh my God, my mom doesn't realize what I'm doing. And I think she taught me a lesson. And that's, as you see in my show, it doesn't matter if my parents are deaf, they speak Spanish. Parents know better. They knew what I was doing.
Right.
They just let me get away with it.
Well, a quick question, and Sandra, you had to hear Sandra's right. Sandra, you had to hear what he was saying or understand what he was saying. My question: have you ever been stopped for a speeding ticket and are your parents, and how do they cope with an officer that said, hand me your license or you're speeding? Has that ever happened?
I was with my dad. I was mad at my dad.
Oh,
we were driving, and he got pulled over, and I was listening to the radio. He got pulled over. I acted like I was asleep. The officer came up to my dad, knocked on the window, said, I'd like to see your license. My dad motioned to his ear, and I could hear the officer saying, yeah, right, sir, the radio's on. And so my dad didn't know what was going on. He hits me in the shoulder and says, wake up. What is this guy saying? I looked at the officer, and I pointed to my ears like I was deaf, and I went, and yeah, my dad got a ticket.
He did. Oh, he did get a ticket. Oh, it didn't work.
I've made it up to them.
A gentleman in our community, Ed Turner, as I mentioned earlier, lost his hearing at 6 years of age, and he brings his car in for service. And he gives us a list of 3 things that are wrong with his car. It has an oil leak and it needs a tune-up, and there's a noise in the left front fender. This is a true story. And so we write the ticket and we fix the car. About 3 days later, he comes back and he says, you didn't fix the noise. And I said, what noise? He said, I don't hear it. He says, but Esther does, and not his wife. and so that's a true story from Ed Turner. And Keith, if you knew this man, I wish you had an opportunity to meet him. He knows and learned how to deal with what his loss was, and he turned his loss into a gain. And it appears that your loss of your parents and what you had to deal with from this high until this high, you've actually done a whale of a job. I congratulate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Anna, the deaf and hearing impaired, give us just an overview of that organization and how many clients it serves. I know Annetta, I talked with her earlier, and she said it had been tough going, started in 1987.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services was actually originally started as the Deaf Service Center in Pensacola, and at the time, and still is really the only deaf service center that is fully operational to serve specifically deaf individuals. We provide interpreting services. We are the only deaf advocacy center in the area, which means we are the conduit for the police department, the fire department, emergency personnel to try to, we train them. I say we, now Justin is training them to work with and how to respond to deaf individuals, their families, how, they can't hear a siren, they can't hear a fire alarm, so really working with them. The police story, the speeding ticket thing is actually an interesting story because they can't hear, we provided them with little flip flashcards to the police officer, so when they stopped someone who was deaf and realized that they were deaf, they had a way to communicate with them. So this organization has done as well as it could for the length of time that it was running, and then when we merged with UCP, United Cerebral Palsy is now taking it to the next level, and so we're just very, very thrilled with that relationship, with that merger, and seeing where it can go from here.
Altogether, I know that Dr. White is the driving force and the glue for that organization, those organizations. Altogether, how many clients do you have off the top of your head are served by United Cerebral Palsy and by the Deaf and Hard of Hearing organization and by Children's organization? Is there some? How many counties does that include? Some 11, 12 counties now?
And don't hold me to this, Dr. White probably knows better, but my understanding is we're from here to Tallahassee, Leon County. So I know we're to Holmes County for sure. And then with the Deaf and Hard of Hearing community, we are the only organization from here to Leon County. So we do serve a wide range and a wide service area.
And one last question, from a sponsorship and from the dollar standpoint, where does the money come from and how is it spent?
It is, we get very, very little money from United Way, very little relative to our operating budget. Probably 95 to 99% of our operating dollars comes from the community and the public.